At the devil. It's all stations a go-go at the moment with these starter videos. This probably won't be of any use to you if you're experienced players who subscribe to the channel, but I've made it specifically in response to some requests on my Twitch stream. I'm going to run through the unlock tech trees and cover some details and recommendations on ships to unlock and the order to do it in. I've noticed a lot of new players rushing to unlock ships and being very disappointed with what they have. I personally don't like this, so hopefully this helps out a bit with that particular issue. And now before I start, I need to stress this is all my personal opinion. If I rag on your favourite ship, no offence intended, but them's the breaks basically. For example, I know people who can go 10 plus and 0 on a Black Widow, but I'm sure as hell not going to recommend that for new players. By the same token, you could very well pick up a ship that I've suggested you don't get and end up having a great experience with it and just clicking with it straight away. So this is all down to opinion, and there is a bit of variance in there. I also won't be going into too much detail on the ships, as I intend to cover them all. If you do want any further details, by all means ask me. I'm more than happy to flesh it out a bit for you. Now I figured out the best way to do it is go through each manufacturer one at a time, working from the top down in the tech tree, and take it from there. So starting off with USR, we've got the Colossus. Colossus is one of the ships I recommend you pick up early on. It's makes for a nice tank, puts out a nice bit of damage, it's quite reasonably easy to fly. It works well with the all of the healers in the game, and it's not too much of a challenge, and you can successfully do what you've got to do in it. Now the destroyer is designed for primarily taking out larger targets or suppressing. The main issue you'll probably find is smaller ships can get behind and above you and wail on you when you get relatively little return fire on them. It's kind of a clunky and slow ship, so what you either have to do is find a lane and sit in it and wail on anyone that comes near the objective you're sat on, or team up with something like an equalizer that can give you a boost to your movement speed so that you can get around a bit more flexibly. Now if you do like sniping, I'd say Watchman is the better of the two available snipers. It puts out a nice amount of damage. It's also got a shield which helps mitigate damage, allowing you to jump out if anybody happens to get too close and starts wailing on you. Obviously I won't be covering the Pioneer as it's unlocked as a standard. Moving on to the Brawler. Now the Brawler at the moment, some people argue, is a little bit overpowered, which I can see their point in all fairness, but I am a massive Brawler fan. It is designed to kill ships at a really short range, so its key features are getting on top of someone, absorbing lots of damage as long as you make sure your armor rotation is good, and just punching people repeatedly in the face until they pass out. There's not much more you can say about it apart from that, and it works really well, best in fact, if you've got a healer supporting it. It is one of those ships that I would recommend that is unlocked. It's definitely a target ship to get your hands on. Now the Displacer, again, is a nice ship, but it relies heavily on composition because it needs support. If you're duo queuing with someone, it's passable, but it works much better if you've got a team built around it. I wouldn't suggest this unlock for the faint of heart. It's going to take a lot of practice to get into the zone of how exactly it operates, and you're going to have a really rough time trying to find that sweet spot of how it works when you're queuing with randoms. So I'd leave this one until a later unlock. I'm personally not a fan of the Black Widow, simply because I can't mesh with it. I'd really like the concept of it, and I'd really like the ship to work for me, but I just can't get on the same level as it. I always end up feeding horribly and doing an awful job, but by the same token I've seen a lot of other experienced players do a hell of a beautiful job with it. It's all down to placement. Again, it's down to team composition more so than a lot of the other ships. You need someone to start those engages and to distract the enemy in order for you to be able to wail on them for an indefinite period of time. If you haven't got that there, then you're pretty much up the creek and there are no paddles in sight. So I'd also recommend you leave this for a later unlock as well. Now I'm a big fan of the Ghost. It takes a certain psychological approach in order to apply the Ghost effectively, because you need to know when to engage, when not to engage, when to go and cap stations instead, and when your team isn't going to win a fight, you need to know that they're not going to win a fight and don't commit to an engagement because you're going to get melted pretty quickly. Again, a lot like the Black Widow, it relies on having a team though that can engage in a fight and distract your opponents, because those first few volleys that you can get off are crucial. If you can get those off without taking any damage and drop a target down, then that's grand. But it's one of the only ships that can burst down a heavy from full to practically empty, if not empty, whilst they're jumping. When you combine it with the jump damage amplification and the ambush and then a missile volley. It's a beautiful sight to see if you ever get the opportunity to pull it off. Again though, I wouldn't recommend it necessarily as an early unlock, maybe sort of mid-game if you've got the spare credits. Disruptor for me is a staple within the healing bracket. It's the only ship that can really effectively keep up with the Enforcer and the Hunter, and it makes for a great support. For the newer players who aren't familiar with the Zarek meta, going back a little bit now, it's a very speed orientated team composition, and the Disruptor fits in beautifully simply because it can blink around the map to target locations, obviously target ships I should say, not locations, and to provide that necessary frontline support. So I would definitely add that to your earlier unlock list if you like healers. The Ranger's like a kind of mobile sniper. I do like the Ranger. It's also really effective at killing brawlers, which a lot of people I don't think realise, because it can outpace the brawler as long as you don't get hooked, while still putting out an awful lot of damage and dropping mines behind it so the brawler can't run directly at you without taking a face full of mines. Again, I would consider unlocking this as once you get past the basic ships, which is what I'll do at the end of the video, is I'll give a rundown of sort of the priority ships I'd unlock, then the next range of ships I'd unlock, and then finally obviously if you've got and put in the man hours for it, finish off the tech trees by all means. Okay, moving on to Zarek, we've got the Gladiator. The DPS off the Gladiator is rather crazy. It can really chew chunks out of a team as long as the people you are engaging don't know how to avoid the shots, which is, well, I suppose that's key with everything in the game essentially. However, the health pool on the Gladiator is so large that it can make for one hell of a sinkhole for enemy fire if it's supported with something like a Corvette or a Disruptor. I've had many a game where we've almost blown the Gladiator up and then bang, straight back up to full health because healers, just because healers basically, and it's a bit soul destroying, and removing it from an objective can be quite difficult because of its phalanx armor and that whole armor buff. So that, if you're looking at the heavy ships, I would say you're talking Colossus, then maybe Gladiator, or perhaps Leviathan. We'll cover Leviathan in a minute anyway. The Paragon, I'd strongly advise you leave this, at the moment at least as it stands, until your last possible unlock. I like the concept of the Paragon. Well, you can't unlock it at the moment in anyway, because I believe it's under rework. The concept of the ship is great. However, its actual practical effectiveness in the field is lackluster, to say the least. It launches fighters that go on, bombers as well, that go off and attack your target, etc, etc, and it says what it does on the tin, but it has no real map presence, apart from if you place it on a forward objective. It does a really nice job of sitting there and soaking up damage whilst the enemy team tries to drive you off the cap point. But then there are plenty of other ships that also do massive amounts of damage in exchange for that large health pool. Please see the Gladiator before, for example. Hunter. Now, there's not much I can say about this. It's the best ship by far in the game. It's the most versatile. It's got a bit of everything. Damage, escape, engage, detection, takes out drones really well, self-sustains in the field. It's everything you need, really. It's something I would recommend that players pick up earlier on as well. Not that I want the game flooded with hunter pilots, obviously. The Overseer. If you're looking for a sniper, look no further than the Watchman. The Overseer isn't great by comparison. The concept, again, it's a nice concept, but it's a bit lackluster on the damage, and it relies on you holding shot on that target in order to get full damage. Now, I've seen a couple of players do amazing work with the Overseer, but I think that's more down to their skill level rather than it is the Overseer. Again, I'd recommend this to be left until the much later end of your tech tree unlock, or you might be quite disappointed by it and the amount of effort you put in to grind out all the cash for it. The Enforcer should be one of your early unlocks, most definitely one of your early unlocks. It's got mobility, it's designed to go out there and harass the enemy, does nice burst damage if you land all of your shots. That's integral, is landing all of your shots in order to get maximum effect, because they stack. So yeah, I would recommend you get this sooner rather than later. And it's great at capping, basically, and contesting caps. The cap mod, it's beautiful. You drop it down, not only does it buff your cap, it inhibits the enemy cap. It's a win-win situation, you can't complain. Infiltrator is from my opinion, an extremely high skill cap ship. I've seen plenty of infiltrators in game and they play horribly, but then once you sort of figure out how it works and you know how to chain your attacks off, you can do immense damage, and it can become soul destroying quite quickly, because not only do the ion drones allow it to trigger its AoE ion blast, they also slow the target, which slow in this game is a big deal. It's a really big deal. There's only one thing that I hate more than slow, and that's just being stopped completely dead in my tracks. But then again, I do play a lot of mobility based ships, so if you take my movement off me, I'm kind of a little bit buggered. Raider is another one of those ships that I would class as a higher skill to use, should we say. You can still have a lot of fun with it anyway. However, to get a really good engage out of a Raider, you need to have impeccable map awareness, because you need to know that all of your opponents are in front of you, so that when you pop your screen, nothing is getting through. Otherwise, you're going to get smashed pretty hard, because the health pool on the ship is quite relatively small. Now, what it excels at is one-on-one engagements against high DPS burst ships. So an Enforcer, for example, will struggle with a Raider as long as the Raider can keep its screen between it and the Enforcer, because it can't get the shots around. Something with flak, though, like a Colossus, their shots just wail around the screen of the Raider, so it's not as effective. If it manages to single someone out and it has its screen on cooldown, it's going to be a very, very uncomfortable engagement for the other player. Essentially what they do is they pop the screen, shoot you as much as they possibly can until the screen goes onto cooldown, then they'll fly around evasively trying to get shots off and bait you to stay around until the screen comes off cooldown, and then they'll repeat the same process again. It can be a bit soul destroying, because you hit a point when you're in a fight against the Raider where you realise you can no longer jump away and you cannot run away. You're just going to die, and it's a question of time. Again, one of those ships, as I said before, I wouldn't recommend it for newer players, but once you sort of get a grasp of the mechanics of the game, it's definitely worth picking up. Okay, moving on to Titan. We've got the Sentinel. As I said, I won't be covering those. They're all starter ships anyway. Starting off with the Leviathan. I've got a bit of a mixed feeling about the Leviathan at the moment. Feels to me like a little bit of a one-trick pony. Obviously, it can lay down a constant whale of fire, which is nice, but it's all about the fusion beam as far as I'm concerned, which is quite easily disabled by a protector with its disarm. Apart from that, its health pool's nice, so it can soak up a lot of damage, but I would probably choose a Colossus or maybe even a Gladiator before I'd go for the Leviathan. Now you've got your Reaper. Your Reaper's a high DPS ship that's got a little bit of flavour for everything, really. It's got a nice shield in the form of the Shroud, which means that if you are in a bad situation, you either pop your Shroud in order to mitigate damage to give you enough time to get a line on your target, or you can pop your Shroud, and if you position yourself just right, you can use the Shroud cover in order to jump home, which you can't complain about really at the end of the day. Now, it does suffer with, obviously, the classic AoE attacks, like the flak from a Widow, or the flak from a Colossus, or even the Pioneer's AoE damage off its shots, because they can bypass the Shroud, the shots sort of fall around it, but you can't hold that against the Reaper, really. It's got a nice bit of armor shred and DPS to tie into it. It's a nice, neat package, and it really effectively does what it's supposed to do on the field. You just have to make sure you keep people in that sweet spot in order to make sure you get maximum effectiveness out of your guns. If you get a Forcer jumping on you and it gets on the underside of you or behind you, it's pretty much good night Vienna, because it's going to get so many volleys off before you even remotely get a gun to bear properly on it. After this, we've got the Interceptor, which is quite similar to the Reaper in the general overall concept. It fires forward, as the Reaper does. It puts down immense damage, and it needs to keep its target in the sweet spot. If it manages to do those things, no trouble whatsoever. But as with the Reaper, if something manages to get behind it, a lighter ship manages to get behind it, like an Enforcer, it's pretty much GG. You might as well just go home. You're done for. In fact, start jumping home, because at least then you die on your own terms. And I'm a big fan of dying on my own terms, in all fairness. What can you say about the Persecutor? It's like the bastard child of the Brawler and the Hunter. I'm a big fan of the Persecutor. I'm currently grinding my way through Titan in order to get my my Equalizer and Raven, and then eventually my Persecutor. It's an easy enough ship to get to grips with as well. It's really effective. As long as you can get into the range that it needs, you point and click. The closer you are to the enemy, the better, really, at the end of the day. And it's really a worthwhile investment of points. It's a ship I would highly recommend you look to get. Protector's your classic healer. Definitely one of those ships you want to get early on, because you don't want to end up in a situation where you desperately need a healer in your team and no one wants to swap to it, or people don't have it available. Occasionally we all have to take it on the chin and play the support role. I'm not a fan of it myself, but I'm definitely a fan of having it in the game, and it's an easy enough ship to use, and you will get results out of it, and it doesn't take an exceptionally high skill cap in order to get those results. However, with a higher skill cap you can definitely get better results. The Equalizer's got a very specific playstyle from the way I do it, the way I see it anyway. It's the run around bait and pull ship. Essentially you go off on one and you act like a special forces back capper, and the idea is you just pull the enemy team out of position, whether you're capping mines behind them so that you pull them back into the lane, or whether you're capping their base. You just constantly run the team ragged and make them respond to you. If you're an Equalizer and you've got at least half of the enemy team following you, then you're doing a good job. If you don't like the idea of just running around and capping stuff, then the Equalizer is probably not the ship for you. Don't get me wrong, it's got some other nice features. It can leech the health off its target, so it keeps you sustained whilst you're out there. It's practically immune to any crowd control effects of any description because of the purge field, as long as it's up. And then the boost gate makes for a really nice escape. Combine that with the Osprey torpedo, it can support in a team fight. It excels really at that one man running off and causing anarchy in the enemy lines. And the last ship on the list is the Raven. I highly recommend the Raven a lot, so much that when we do practice games, that I'm the one who's always trying to drive that we have a Raven in the team. So much so that I've started to learn how to fly the Raven, just so I can turn around and say, look, I'll fly the Raven if no one else wants to do it, because I value it that much. I think it's a seriously underrated ship. The reason being, most ships in the game need their energy in order to do something. The Raven takes their energy off them. It's a really simple equation. If they haven't got energy, they can't do much. So yeah, it's a no-brainer really. So going back to the start for a second, I'm going to rank the ships between 1 and 3. 1 being the ships that you would unlock first, 2 second, and obviously 3 being those ones that are left at the end that you'll eventually unlock if you intend to unlock the whole tech tree. So let's start with the ranking then. So I'd put a 1 on the Colossus. I'd probably put a 3 on the Destroyer. I'd put a 1 on the Brawler. I'd put a 2 on the Watchman. The Displacer, I would give it a 3. The Black Widow I would also give a 3. The Ghost, I would give a 2. The Ranger, I'd give a 2. The Disruptor, I'd give a 1. The Gladiator, sort of a 2 to 3. A 2 to 3 on the Gladiator. The Paragon, just don't even go there. The Overseer would definitely be a 3. The Hunter's a 1. The Enforcer's a 1. The Infiltrator, for newer players, I would say it's a 3. The Raider, a 2. The Leviathan, it's again, I'd say 2 to 3, but I would put it higher on the list than the Destroyer, definitely. It's on about par with the Leviathan. That's more of a personal preference than anything else, I suppose. The Reaper, I would say a 1, along with the Interceptor. The Persecutor's a 1. The Protector's a 1. And the Equalizer and Raven are both 2s. Again, they play a very support role, so it's not necessarily down to everyone's flavour. Now, I hope this video has been helpful. As I said before, it's more designed for newer players who aren't sure what to unlock and in which order. If you've got any questions about any of the ships, or you want me to go into further detail, I'll do the best I can at the moment. Obviously, a lot of the tech tree, with the reset, a lot of my tech tree is still locked, and it's a little bit soul destroying when I look at all those greyed out boxes, but there isn't much I can do about it, sadly. I've got a couple more of these starter videos coming, and then I'll get back to doing my regular derpy shit. Got a couple of interesting videos coming that aren't specifically help based, so it's something to look forward to, I suppose, in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, obviously hit the like button and leave a comment below if you've got any questions, and stay well as always.